thank you all for being here on behalf of everybody here. Let's start with some introductions, if we may. And yes, Catherine, if we start with you. Just introduce yourself briefly, but particularly your area of scientific work.
My name's Catherine. I'm an early career research scientist, and I love plants. In my work specifically, I work on the plant that, in a literal sense, gives us our daily bread, wheat. We grow a lot of it, and have started to realize that modern farming relies a lot on nitrogen fertilizer, which is environmentally costly. So I'm researching how wheat plants naturally regulate their growth and asking, can we use that to find new ways to boost wheat yields whilst using less nitrogen fertilizer?
Awesome. Thank you. Simon?
Simon Harding-Blockley, and I'm sort of an archaeologist and sort of a geologist and sort of a physical geographer. I did a PhD in a thing called science-based archaeology, so you kind of half science, half archaeology. And during the course of my PhD, did a lot of work on past environments and how that we use those to understand some aspects of human behaviour. So I was working in the last ice age, and I was looking at recolonisation of northern Europe at the end of the last ice age, and whether it was climatically driven. So I became more and more involved in environmental and climatic work, so I moved into a geography department, and I now do that. I date things is the core thing that I do. I work on different kinds of dating techniques, and I basically look at how humans have either interacted with the climate system or how humans have impacted on the environment in the past.
Yes, I'm Dr. Poppy Harding, and my research kind of follows and links to some of Simon's work, but on a much more ecological side. So I look at how our environments have changed at different points in the past, how they've changed on different timescales. I really specialise in working in lake ecosystems, and I also do more modern work on how humans are impacting those ecosystems and how those ecosystems are responding to that.
Brilliant, thank you. Catherine, I'm going to come to you first, and let's start with story rather than theory. So growing up, did you feel that there was that you had to choose between faith and science, that there was a conflict, or did those two things kind of fit naturally for you?
Short answer, yes, I think they fit naturally for me. Mum and Dad are Christian, and I was brought up going to church, and Dad's also an engineer. So I think I saw that example already of someone who was both Christian and scientist.
Brilliant. Same question for you guys.
I suppose working in the kind of science I work in, which is that where there has been always a tension between science and faith in kind of geoscience and explaining where we come from. Yeah. There is, but I was educated by nuns, and I used to go to the Methodists, and I was a sort of practicing Christian through most of my teens, and then yes, when I kind of went to university, there was a tension, which I have worked through, and I think it's just how you, if faith is there. It's just that tension of understanding kind of a written text like the Bible, and then the teachings and the learnings of science, and I know so many Christian scientists, and we all keep quite quiet. Well, I don't, I'm quite happy not to. But honestly, you kind of find yourselves, and actually, we've all worked through that tension, but it doesn't stop faith.
Can you point to a particular moment where your faith was challenged by your science?
So basically, before I went to university, I knew by this point I was going to do archaeology, and the archaeology I was doing a lot of as a hobby was medieval archaeology, so like excavating medieval castles and that's a hobby. But in researching before I went to university, I started reading a lot about human evolution, and that, bearing in mind the kind of faith I was taught, particularly as as a youngster was very literal. That was the starting point of a challenge, which takes some working through, but I've worked through.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, I think I'm more like Catherine in that it sat very naturally for me as a kid, so perhaps less conflict. I spent a lot of my childhood gallivanting around the countryside on horses, and I think that very much fed into where I ended up in terms of my research, but actually just that ability of being out and actually seeing the wonder of God's creation, and then actually being driven by that to kind of ask questions. And certainly when I've been talking about like my research, that was very much driven by a desire to protect the world about what people were doing to it. So I think that's very led by my faith. It's quite intrinsically.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, let's. Well, one's not switched on, so let's try that. Just if we just carry on with that thought, Poppy, because I think that's really interesting. And you were talking about, you know, your science being led by your sense of nature and the outdoors. Can you talk us a little bit more about that and just how those two things come together for you?
Yeah, I think as a Christian, you get a very strong sense of needing to protect. You know, we've been given this kind of role of responsibility over our planet, and I think as a child, I grew up obviously with going to church regularly and the support of my youth groups, and then going to school and learning very much on the geography side, you know, what was happening to the planet in terms of climate change, in terms of pollution, in terms of actually we're not doing a very good job of this. And I think that was a drive that you can't sit and look at this world and not want to act on that. So that very much led my scientific career. I wouldn't have... Yeah.
Let's do that one. Perfect.
Is that better?
Much better.
Yeah, so just that kind of sense of they are intrinsically linked, the idea that we are custodians and we're supposed to look after our planet, and that very much gave me a desire. I wouldn't have really said I was a scientist, you know, I didn't really think I was a scientist until I got into my master's at least. Yeah. So it kind of grew into that, but it was very much more from my faith that I kind of started that journey, I think.
Cool. Simon, do you want to chip in on that same question? So the sort of the externalities of the world, and nature, and how you kind of bring that back into your science, whether that's as relevant.
Well, it is in the sense that we both work on similar questions, but I suppose
you just switch that one. It's the button at the front.
Okay. Yeah. So I think looking at the wonders of the universe, I do as a non-scientist. So I think 'cause my science, basically my science is dating things. So I find volcanic ash that's travelled thousands of kilometres, or I use radioactive decay techniques. I always find those fascinating and amazing. But kind of the wider wonder of the universe and the faith element of that, I don't see myself as a scientist looking at that. Most of my science is about understanding humans in the past. Yeah. And I think that where I had a connection when I was thinking about human behaviour in the past, and thinking about when, for example, the first ceremonial burials go back a couple hundred thousand years, and it's a different species of human that's doing it. But this is Neanderthals. There's a burial called the flower burial at Shanadar in Iraq. So there's a species of humans, we share about 5% DNA with them. And they probably had the first ceremonial burial. That's debated, but what they definitely did had the first evidence we have of someone who had a significant trauma, and that's healed, and they must have been kept alive and been cared for. And that kind of human connection, I think, will reinforce the faith that for hundreds of thousands of years, we, both as other species and our species, have been trying to connect with something wider. We know for absolute fact that by the time our direct genetic ancestors come into Europe from Africa about 40,000 years ago, we are ceremonially burying, and we have that, we're trying that connection to the divine. And I think that, as a scientist and a Christian, really, that's where I get the tingles, I think.
Cool, thank you. Can I grab the... Catherine, I'm going to come to you now. There's a bit of a sense, I think, that faith and science are both truth-seeking disciplines, but one is more associated. So, science is more about the what and the how, in my very simple terms, and faith is more about the why. Is that something that you find yourself in your study? And how do you reconcile those two things?
I guess for me, the time that I started to be aware that there's maybe ideas out there of people that suggest that there's a conflict between faith and science was when I went to university. So we do things with Christian Union, like Text a Toasty, where we'd invite people to ask us questions about faith, and we bring them a toasty and have a conversation with them. And I think that's the point where you started to see there are people asking, well, when science tells us so much about the world, why do we need faith? And I think what you've expressed there is what we said to some of those people, that faith and science do ask different questions, and science doesn't tell us what life means, doesn't tell us how we should live our lives.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. Simon,
No, I think I completely agree with that they are two different things. So science is science is lots of things. Science is stuff done by scientists, and a lot of scientists spend very, very little time doing what we say we do, which is we test things formally. We formally propose a hypothesis and we test it against data, and if it isn't failed, then we temporarily believe it. That's the way science is supposed to work. We don't do that most of the time. Most of the time we're generating and analysing data and just trying to understand it. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to solve a problem or understand something in a way that's quantifiable. But it's not getting to some ultimate truth. What I actually really do like about science is, from a scientific perspective, you only know what you know now, and you know you're probably wrong. But a lot of scientists don't spend their working lives behaving like that. Whereas faith is about the why. I think that's the bottom line, and it's trying to answer questions that science can't answer. It's interesting. I do a lot of work with artists, and we're trying to reconstruct past landscapes and past environments, and trying to get into the heads of somebody who might be living in the Bronze Age. And that is beyond science. I can reconstruct their environments, I can reconstruct their landscapes, I can date when they're there, but I can't get into their heads. And the artist is saying, well, there is no way of getting into their heads. All you can try and do is put your head in theirs, which is really interesting. And that's not doing science anymore. And I think that's more like faith. Faith is about trying to connect with the idea of a God. And science is trying to connect with, for me anyway, the core message of Christianity, which is about basically love and all that really important stuff. So they're just different. And they're not in conflict. The reason we think they're in conflict is because there were battles for a long time. Christianity at that point, a few hundred years ago, was based on dogma, and at least in the church structures, and science was saying, but hang on a minute, look, like dinosaurs, and that's where the conflict appears. But that's, I think, to misunderstand what both different things are trying to do.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add to that. I think you've both put it really well. But yeah, they're very different in the sense that science, we are trying officially to put that hypothesis out. We spend a lot of time in science actually wondering about what our data means, though, and exploring it. And there's usually a lot of different ways you can interpret that data. It's not black and white. I think that's something that we kind of like, certainly from the media point of view, they want us to have black and white answers, and we don't in science. And I think that actually fits really well with actually how we feel about faith. Like sometimes there is just the acceptance that you don't know and that you may be very, very wrong. But actually you need that kind of faith and that kind of, yeah.
Just hang on to the microphone. I'm going to shout. Just rather than move it back. Is there an example that you can give, Poppy, and particularly given your work, where science has given you answers but faith has given you meaning?
That's a really tricky one. I think, it's a bit like Simon would say, I can produce you a record of environmental change currently, or I can produce it, 50,000 years ago. It doesn't really matter. But if I'm looking at something I had out a couple of years ago was a record from Norfolk, and we could see really rapid switches in the environmental conditions, and that was potentially translating into atmospheric shifts. But why do we care about that? Why? What is the bigger question? And really that comes down to actually the impact it has on life and on people. And I think that's where you kind of get that kind of how does this make things better for us? How does self understand something? And that's where you get that kind of scientific linking into the why. And I think that helps with your kind of faith, understanding how we can help each other.
Can I?
Yeah.
Just throw in an example from a colleague. So a friend of mine who actually came to our wedding here, and known her for years and years and years, and we went out for lunch and we were talking about research. And I mentioned, I can't remember why, but I mentioned a friend of mine, or a guy I knew who was a vicar, and she went, "Simon, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yes, you can." She said, "Are you a Christian?" I said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Oh, so am I." I said, "How did you not know I was a Christian? You came to my wedding. They gave us a tea towel because we did all the coffee." She said, "Yeah, I just thought that was poppy." I was like, no, I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian." She said, "Oh, good, so am I." So I didn't know you were a Christian. She said, "Yeah." She said, "I only really recently come back to God." She said, I grew up as a Christian, a bit like me, grew up as a Christian, went to university, challenged faith. And I said, "So what brought you back?" And she said, "I was in Cambodia, and I was working with a load of Cambodian miners, and we were working in horrific conditions, but they were just kind of kept going. And one of the things that became obvious to her was that part of what kept them strong was their faith. They were always very, very devout Buddhists. And she made her think about, why am I looking down on your religion and your faith when it's part of you? And thinking through that kind of brought her back to faith. And I think that sometimes that kind of interface of kind of what we do as academics or scientists and our faith can work together.
Brilliant. Yeah, love that. Thank you. Catherine, I wonder if you can talk us through an example where scientific discovery, something that you've found, whether it's in your studies or kind of later on through your research, has actually deepened your sense of wonder or awe for creation.
Something that I think I can never tire of watching is a seed growing, unfurling its leaves, becoming something so much bigger than this tiny packet of life that we plant into the soil. And I guess I say that as a gardener as much as a scientist. Recently, I had the privilege of doing an experiment where I grew a collection of heritage wheat varieties, and the seeds, sort of at first glance, they all look pretty similar. But when I grew them, each plant was subtly different. It had its own features and complexity, different heights, different ear shapes. And there's something incredible in the amount of detail there is in all of creation.
Thank you.
I think I've got a couple of examples for this, but some of them are in wider scientific discoveries, and just those moments when you read something in your area and you're like, wow, that is just amazing, like, how cool. So for one of them was back in 2013, when we had the Haysborough footprints. You will have seen that come out on the news. So these footprints that were preserved probably back from about 900,000 years ago. Different species of hominin, probably the first footprints of hominin in the UK. Just really amazing. That kind of just blows my brains. I'm just like, wow. And then on a more recent, I suppose, response is actually a little bit similar to Catherine's, is when we get to share something that our students don't know. So I'm very teaching focused at the moment, and last week I had microscopes out with my lovely second years, and we were looking at my particular favourite proxy, which are a type of algae which are called diatoms, and they are absolutely macroscopic. So we were looking at 1,000 times magnification, and they were getting to see all these amazing little features that preserve for thousands of years on their silica structures. And yeah, just one of those moments when you're like, they get to see something new and exciting, and yeah, it's just kind of like, how amazing is our world, and how intrinsically detailed is it that we don't always notice.
Awesome, thank you.
So I think for me, awe about creation is in the smallest things. So I said I date things, and one of the techniques I use, and I trained on actually, is a technique called radiocarbon dating. So anything that's got carbon in it, about 0.0000001% of that carbon in your body is radioactive. And it's radioactive material that's made by bombardment of cosmic rays that are coming from the universe, bombarding the outer atmosphere. And that creates a whole set of reactions, one of which that turns stable nitrogen into unstable carbon. And then we use that radioactivity decay to date things. And I think it was the realization while teaching and trying to explain, some students said, how does radioactive decay work? And I said, it's very, very simple. In this particular case, you convert a neutron to a proton to a neutron, and then you get this happening and that happening, and you end up with stable nitrogen. She said, but how do you turn a neutron into a proton? I said, quarks. And they said, what? I said, well, atoms are made up of subatomic particles. But actually, those subatomic particles are made up of subatomic particles called quarks. They're the smallest particle we know of. And that kind of, I'm not a nuclear physicist, but that kind of blew my mind. And that's where I think that, if you, whatever way you think God created the universe, God is, for me, that is in that minute before the Big Bang that science will never be able to explain. So God is in the quarks. And that's where it blows my mind when I think about creation.
Hopefully you're all paying attention to that. There will be a test later. Just pass the mic back to Poppy, because I think we need to, sadly, I mean, I could do this all day, but I think we probably need to get on with the service. So we'll do a little quick fire round. So Poppy, so different question for you each. So Poppy, what Bible passage resonates most with your work as a scientist?
So I had a bit of a think about this, and I think it comes out of Job 12, and it's verses 7 to 10. Can't remember it completely off the top of my head, but it's effectively, we need to go and, ask the animals, ask the fishes, ask the earth to tell us the answers, and how can God's hand be in this creation. And that very much resonates with me as a paleoecologist, because that's literally what I do in my science. I go and I look for what is in the sediments that can tell us about the environment at that time and how it has changed. So very much kind of quite literal explanation of kind of my science in the Bible, which is lovely.
Perfect. Thank you. Simon, for you, one misconception that Christians often have about science?
I think Poppy already made this point, but it's a fair point, that it's completely absolute. Science, and there's a right and wrong answer, where science is exploring really deeply complicated things. Different sciences have different challenges, but what we're trying to do as scientists is work towards an understanding, often trying to base that on falsification when it works. And what we don't think that the universe is all explained, and you don't need mystery, and you don't need faith. I know a guy who's a really famous, in my world, ice core scientist. So these guys would drill 3-kilometre long cores through ice caps, and they reconstruct climate. And this guy was a legend. He'd kind of one of the first people to show how quickly climate can change. So we get worried about climate change entirely naturally. In the right context, in the right setting, climate can go from temperatures that are cold enough to grow glaciers in Scotland to temperatures nearly as warm as today in 20 years, naturally. And he showed that, so he's a legend. And he's a Christian. And we were talking about how he can be so sure about that, but be a Christian. He said, well, he said, I'm sure of that because I've got data and I've tested it and tested it and tested it. I absolutely know about that. But there's so much in the universe I don't know about, and there's so much that science will never know about. Yeah. And that's where God comes in.
Perfect. Thank you. Catherine, finally, one misconception that scientists have about faith.
I guess I don't know for sure what other scientists think. Maybe I should ask them more often. But I think as scientists, we like to look at the evidence from every angle before we believe something. And perhaps some scientists are tempted to think that those outside the science world and people of faith are maybe more inclined to simply believe what they're told without thinking it through as much. And I don't think that's true. I think we do think very carefully about what we believe.
Brilliant, thank you. Let's pause there. There will be an opportunity, I'm sure, later on to grill these three over a cup of tea or coffee later on. But in the meantime, will you please thank Catherine and Poppy and Simon.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, Catherine. It's fascinating to hear how different worlds of work and science all come together. Some of you will know that our daughter worked for quite a long while on a project that was going into schools and helping children to think about how science and faith could be alongside each other. So thank you for putting it all together. I tell you what, I was sitting over there and the noise was outside. I think they're doing things with car park of the school, and the rain was coming down and none of us are very warm, and I thought, this is why we need the sound attenuation doing in this church, because it would have got rid of that noise, would have been feeling a bit warmer. So that's work in progress. William was at a meeting on Friday trying to get us some more money from HS2. One bit of work that has been done, if you're very pleased, this is so exciting. The toilet, the disabled toilet, has had its pipe rerouted. The bends have gone that have caused it to block. So, isn't that just amazing? So, the things that a vicar has to think about with other people. So, this week, today there's Bobble Church at 3:00. On Tuesday, pancake party, it's Shrove Tuesday. So 10 till 12, there'll be pancakes and all sorts of things to do. Wednesday, it is Ash Wednesday. There'll be a service at 6:00, which will be communion and imposition of ashes. So if you brought your palm cross in, I'll be taking them home and Paul will burn them and produce the ash. On next Saturday, David's doing another of his meditative prayer sessions, 10 till 11. Also, tomorrow night is when Matthew Routledge and Michael Hunt will be licensed into the benefice of Aylesborough, the Kimballs and Stoke Mandeville. And that service is taking place at St Nicholas, Great Kimble. So it's going to be very full, but you are very welcome. Get there early. Parking will be fun. Sorry, that's how it is there. So, but please do be there to support them or be holding them in prayer. One or two asks for help. One person has come forward to say they'll lock up on a Sunday night, but aren't around to be able to do it all the time. So if anybody else could help, we'd be really grateful for that. Pete's sitting at the back, so you can have a chat with him. Jack needs people to help with the parenting course that's going to be running after half term, and people who may be interested to help him in Shine, the sort of children holiday program that we did last year and hoping to repeat in August. So if you think that you would be able to help with that, Jack's sitting at the back, be talking to him, please. Those of you who knew Helen Biggs, who's a long time member of St Mary's, her funeral's on the 24th at 2 p.m. I think those are all the notices, so thank you.